Ha ha! Hey, what is going on, crypto people? David Schwartz is making a play or a call on a new reserve currency in a Twitter Spaces, a new reserve currency. And I listened to some of this Twitter Spaces. I think Crypto Eddie shared it, or was it 801 underscore XRP? I can't remember which one. But anyway, it is interesting that he's made this play. When I think about his thesis for around this new play of a reserve currency. It's interesting to me. Look, we've said on this channel, I don't know how many times that look, the world as a whole is just getting tired of the U.S. dollar, the weaponization of SWIFT, and the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Right? We all know that. Everyone, every country, every nation, every whether it be prime minister, king, whatever leader of a nation is realizing that the Triffin dilemma is a challenge, right? And the Triffin dilemma is when a nation has its currency as the world's reserve currency, when that particular nation does well, the other countries don't do well because of the world reserve currency, because the nation's world reserve currency. When the other nations do well, the countries who's like the dollar in that country doesn't do well. It's called the Triffin dilemma. A lot of nations are getting familiar with it, understand this dilemma, and I think the Bank of England, um, I forget his name now, Bank of England guy, I can't remember his name. But he was the Bank of England governor, the prior governor. I forget his name. He kind of reminded us all of that particular situation, the Triffin dilemma. Not only do we have the Triffin dilemma that the United States and other nations deal with the US dollar being the world's reserve currency, the other nations have to deal with also the weaponization by the US with SWIFT and sanctions and the like because of the fact that the United States dollar is the world's reserve currency. So other nations, right? So let me do this. Other nations and the US. Now I could put up 10, I could put up 20, I could put up 30, I could put up 100, but ultimately the US is outnumbered. But the US thinks, well, we got the dollar as reserve currency, 65% of the world's reserves are held in the dollar, we're good. And instead of working together, the US, quite frankly, has leveraged this position to the ill and to the harm of other nations. Which leads me to David Schwartz, the CTO of Ripple's thesis about a new world reserve currency. And this is what he said, and I find it to be fascinating. He said, look, the other nations realize that their currency, right? When we talk about a bunch of nations, they realize that their currency doesn't have the chance to be the world reserve currency. And in addition to that, the country or nation that might have a chance, Russia's ruble, China's yuan, the other nations don't want that currency to be the world reserve currency, right? The US slipped in back in the days when it did slip in as the world reserve currency because the US was a friendlier, embracing nation. No one expected the US to flip the switch, if you will, or flip the script, if you will, and become this antagonizing, you know, what is it? Confessions of an Economic Hitman nation. No one expected that, but it happened. So now that these other nations have history behind them and they can use the history, they're saying, yeah, we're tired of what the US has done. And you know what, this whole reserve currency thing, why don't we have something that no one owns? This is what David Schwartz is saying. No one owns and controls it. No one owns this reserve currency and use that as the world's reserve currency. It's an interesting thought, an interesting thesis from David. And David said he got this from when Ripple, the company, was full steam ahead as a fintech company selling software to banks, right? And he said that a lot of questions from the outside is, well, why wouldn't the banks just do their own thing, make a bank thing, and provide infrastructure or create software? And he said, well, this is, and we say this on the channel all the time. Well, yeah, the top 10 banks can afford to do that, build their own software, put in their own infrastructure. But the other 9,990 banks can't. They would still be beholden to the 10 banks. And the 10 banks are tired, just like the nations of the world are tired of the US. The 9,990 banks are tired of the top 10 banks. And he said that's how he got his thesis for the world reserve currency. The reason why RippleNet is what it is because the 9,990 banks are tired of the corresponding banking model in which they have to pay to play. Right? And so what he is suggesting, what David Schwartz is suggesting in terms of the world's reserve currency, is the nations are just like tired of the dollar, tired of the weaponization of SWIFT, tired of this whole game plan of going into a country and ripping it of its resources, which is the U.S. has been doing. Tired of that. Why don't we have a reserve currency that no one owns? That no one owns. That leads me to the interview that I was listening to with Chris Lawson. Shout out to Crypto Eddie for sharing this interview. It was about 48 hours before the Judge Torres made her ruling on XRP. Chris Lawson was interviewed by this lady named Kara Swisher. And I found it to be, quite honestly, personally, I found it to be quite antagonizing of an interview. But, Chris kept us cool. We don't get to hear from Chris Lawson very often, but Chris Lawson slipped in something in an interview, and I'm putting in a link in the description so you can check out the interview, or go to Crypto Eddie's YouTube channel, like check out her latest thing. It's in there as well, my latest video. But he slipped in something. She said, "Well, Ripple and okay, you guys use this crypto as XRP, and it's for cross-border payments." He said, "Yeah." He said, "But she said, but it's primarily for remittance." He said, "Well, remittances is one part of it, but it's really anything cross-border." That's what Chris Lawson said. He said, "Yeah, remittances is part of it, but it's really anything that moves cross-border." And he said companies. Right? He said companies. He said treasuries. And he gave a couple of examples. But the bottom line is, he said, "Yeah, well, it's really anything that moves cross-border." And we say this on the channel all the time. The XRPL can move anything of value, in 3 to 5 seconds for less than a penny. Throw in what Chris Larson said. Well, it's really anything that moves cross-border, right? There's a lot of things that move cross-border, right? We're in a global world. So we talking about real estate. We talking about he said treasuries. It could be art. It could be invoices. It could be any tokenized real world asset that moves cross border. But I thought it was interesting. He said, "Well, it's really anything that moves cross border." Well, world reserve currencies move cross border, and the idea is no one owns the XRPL ledger. No one owns it. It's open, public, decentralized ledger, right? And this idea, if no one quote unquote owns it, it could be a world reserve currency. I find that to be fascinating because it's a bridge currency, right? It's a bridge currency that takes the yuan that the United States doesn't want to hold and turns it into the US dollars. It takes the US dollar that Russia, China, and the BRICS nations are saying they're just tired of holding and turns it into their respective currency. You see what I'm saying? My question is, would Ripple have to somewhere in some way, shape, form, or fashion change something with the escrow that they stored? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to it. I do. It does lead me to think, though, that nations are going to become better and better and more educated to the idea of XRP and the XRP ledger and the benefit of the world, of the nations of the world, especially G20 nations, to have that price be at a high price. It's a benefit to nations for it to be $100 as opposed to $1. It's just and it's a mutual benefit. It's not exclusive to any nation, and I think that's important. I think the more and more we get that DEX and we get the XLS30D, we get that done, get it approved, get automated market maker going. I think it's going to speak to a lot of things. And I think it's important to pay attention to. But I think David Schwartz is his thesis. Nations nations will begin to say, I'm just tired of the US dollar and I'm tired of the US. Why can't we just have a neutral bridge asset be the world's reserve currency? You don't control it, and we don't control it. It just makes sense. And what makes more sense is you can't sit at home and say all the other nations of the world are just loving what the US is doing with this dollar and this weaponization. You just can't say that. I used to ask my European friends all the time, what is this angst? This is when I was in the military. What is this angst about the U.S.? Why is this always this disdain? Then I found out about the confessions of an economic hitman. I found out about that. I didn't know about that. I didn't know the U.S. was going in there and pillaging nations under some guise to help them rebuild. I didn't know. I learned about the dollar representation from being in crypto. These are facts. These are things. So it leads me to think, yeah, nations are fed up and are looking to an alternative. This is a reason why BRICS is becoming so popular. It ain't about the digital yuan. It's about being able to walk away from being treated unfairly. Just kind of makes sense. All right, guys, listen. This wraps up your XRP Ripple Daily News in about 0 to 10 minutes. Do me a favor. Let me know in the comments. Let me know, what do you think? Do you think nations are fed up? Do you think that they would be open to this a reserve currency that no one owns, and now it's the world's reserve currency instead? You see what I'm saying? No one owns it, so it can't be weaponized. It can't be used against them. They don't have to deal with the Triffin. What is it? It's a Triffin dilemma. Kind of makes sense. Let me know in the comments. Guys, listen, this has been your XRP Ripple Daily News in about 0 to 10 minutes. I hope that it has been of value to you. If it has, do me a favor, hit that like button. And if you've been hanging out watching the Crypto Series, please consider subscribing to the channel. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you know whenever we go live or whenever we upload a video. Listen, I'm going to end this one like I do all my videos and remind you guys of this. That old money doesn't want you to win. But that's okay, though, because you and I, we're already winning. I'll talk to you soon, guys. See ya.